I'm excited to be with another person that has conquered the LSAT. And so she's here with us to talk a little bit about her journey and how she went about it. But first, can you go ahead and just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background information?
Yeah, so my name is Nina Fusco. I'm a 1L at Vanderbilt Law School, and I also am an LSAT tutor, and my LSAT tutoring page is Logic LSAT Tutoring.
So where are you from?
So I'm originally from Florida, and now I live in Nashville to attend law school.
When did you start studying for the LSAT?
I started studying for the LSAT very casually a year before I took it, and then around 6 months before I took it, I started taking it into high gear and studying a lot harder.
Were you working or going to school while you were studying?
Yes, I was. So my schedule was very, very hectic when I was studying for the LSAT because I was a student full time, and then also I had a job, well, an internship that was like 20 hours a week. So I had a lot of hours of school, a lot of hours of that, and then I tried to take a course that was 3 days a week and then several hours at night. And so it was all just like very, very hectic, very busy. But once the summer started, I really was able to designate more time towards it. And towards the end of the year, I had to cut down on any extracurriculars and things like that in order to study. But yeah.
So for people that are, this is unique or different for me because I was not in school when I was studying for the LSAT. But for those students that are, especially when they're in their senior year, what do you recommend for them? Because I imagine there's probably a lot of people that will take the LSAT the fall after they graduate. Would that be what most people would take it if they were in school their senior year?
Yeah. So what I would recommend if you're in school, if you're college and you're taking it, I would recommend definitely, you don't have to take aside. A lot of people think, oh, I have to designate this big time chunk every day to study, and otherwise I won't study. And that's not the case. What I would do a lot of days that I didn't really have time to study is I would designate my lunch break. I would study during the entirety of my lunch break. And that little time aggregates up and you're able to do drills and things like that. Obviously, you won't have enough time to do a full-length practice test during that time. But even if you have time to drill and go over questions you missed last time you studied and things like that, every little time you have available is very valuable, and spend it wisely.
I tell people, if you then just focus on one question type for an entire week. Like do main conclusion questions and get good at those, because if you're, like you said, once you went into the summertime, you had more time to study. Like if you can just get really, really good at 3 or 4 things on the LR section, I'm sure it's different or even on game sections, if you can just get good at ordering games, then once you do start studying, I feel like it would be so helpful to have some type of foundation rather than trying to do like everything at once.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And a lot of people, when I tell them, like, with LR, you need to get a solid base with conclusion questions, they're like, why? I get almost all of them correct.
Preach it. This is preach.
But the thing is you could be getting them correct just because of context clues, whatever, and not really know how to solve them. And then it backfires in almost every other category of the LSAT. It all aggregates, snowballs together if you don't have exactly one category 100% down.
Okay, so I always have my students highlight, well, I don't care if you highlight on the actual test that you take, but when we're reviewing, I have them highlight or tell me like what sentence is the conclusion. And when they can't tell me the right sentence, they're like, well, I got the question right. Well, you're absolutely right, because if it's a strengthen or weaken question, we're not trying to strengthen or weaken the sentence they said, we're strengthening the conclusion or weakening the conclusion, or sufficient or necessary, and that's how we build off of it. What are your thoughts on if they are in school only focusing on one section at a time rather than doing the whole test at once? Or are there any tips that you would throw in there?
Well, I think that a lot of times students will hyperfixate on the area they're weak in. Like I have a lot of students that come to me for LG and then they let RC slip and things like that. And so it's important to kind of be balanced in all of them, in my opinion, but it's just a matter of where your brain works and how. And it's just a matter of what you want to do with that. But I kind of recommend going, a lot of the areas are compatible too. Like when I'm studying with students, I like to do necessary sufficient questions along with conditional logic for LG. So they get that conditional logic down for both sections at the same time. So there's some minimal overlap between sections that are important. But I think like RC, you should be doing all along just because that's something that takes a lot of time and improvement. A lot of people will come to me like a couple weeks before the LSAT and they'll be like, help me with RC. I need to get 10 points higher with RC. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
No, I agree. You're absolutely right. I think that answer to it also depends like how long you have. So if in a dream world now looking back, if I would have known I'm taking my test in 9 months, I think I would have started in January and I would have just did one section for a month and then added in a section for that second month and studied both of them and then add in that third one. Because if you don't have very much time, I think I would have like made so much more progress if I would have been motivated by doing well in one section. But then I wouldn't stop. Like I would keep it. And like you said, they're so compatible, especially with conditional reasoning. And like the boot camp that we teach doesn't do games, but we still have to go over conditional statements, right? Like if this or not. Yeah. So what do you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Well, we talked about this earlier a bit, but I really wish I would have not listened to the noise as much about it. And so what I mean by that is when I was studying, I had a lot of people say like, oh, you need this score to get into this school. You're way far off right now. Like when I was early on in my studying. And then I had a lot of people say, well, if you can't handle the stress load of what you're doing now, you're not going to be able to make it in law school. A lot of like discouraging things. And I think that people tell that a lot, but I always tell people like, I almost didn't go to law school. I almost didn't like gave up studying for the LSAT just because of all that stuff. And a lot of people do. And I always tell people like, the only valid reason to not go to law school is because you can't handle it and it's not compatible for your life, or that you're not interested in it and you don't want to be a lawyer. Then in that case, don't go to law school. If you don't want to be a lawyer, like, and you're just doing it for some other reason, like, don't go. But other than that, like, don't let some stranger on the internet that's aggressive talk you out of it, you know?
Yeah,
that happens.
I like so many students come to me and they're like, well, I'm taking the test in January. And I'm like, well, why so soon? And they're like, well, because this is what I need. But whenever you take away some of those pressures and you just give people the space to learn, rather than listening to what people are saying on the internet, and you just focus on doing your best on this test, you actually see so much improvement because you're not trying to base it on anybody else's timeline either. And that was one thing, like it took me significantly longer than some people to get to my score, but I think that's, people need permission to take a longer time.
Yeah, definitely. And like the improvements aren't going to come overnight. And the thing is too, is like in law school, you're going to get a lot of beatings grades wise, and you might get roasted in class.
Yeah, explain this to us. Tell us why we need to be exposed to being beat down a little bit.
In law school, you're going to get beat down a lot. And the thing is the people that get beat down, but they keep going, are lawyers, you know? Those are the ones that are lawyers. The people that get beat down and cower away from it and end up like dropping out because of it, because there are people who drop out because of it, they end up not being lawyers, you know? And that's the thing. If you're able to say, look, I got a bad diagnostic test score. I'm really bad at reading comprehension right now. I'm really bad at this right now, but I'm going to work my butt off and increase my score and keep at it, no matter how many times I fail. That's great, and that's going to serve you well. But if you look at it and say, you know what, maybe this is not for me anymore, that attitude is not going to really help in law school, because you're going to get beat down a lot in law school. I got beat down tons.
Is there any correlation between material on the LSAT and either like studying for the LSAT in law school, or even some of the content and some of the skills you develop in law school?
Oh, 10 out of 10. Law school reading comprehension is like the name of the game. You're reading every night, and then they ask you questions in class. Basically, it's how it's all taught. And if you're not able to do reading comprehension well, it's going to be a lot harder in law school, but it's still possible. There's people reading comprehension is my worst favorite category on the outside, and I love the reading in law school. So it really just depends. But and also like necessary sufficient stuff always happens in law school. Like that is a big blunder if you don't get that.
I was reading about like the necessary and proper clause the other day, and like people's different definitions of necessary, and I was like, Hamilton, you would not do well on the LSAT, because that is not what necessary means in like our world. But it made me laugh, because every time I read anything, it says like, this is what this word means, and like this is how you use it. And that's kind of what the LSAT is so like about, is like these are just what the words mean, like some, at least one. What does many mean? What does most mean? Which I know it's probably even more extreme in law school, but I would assume that following those rules is important.
Yeah, definitely. And also like there's a lot of information at once, and being able to make sense of it is very difficult. And the other thing too that people don't talk about is during law school, the exams are 4 hours. At least in my school, the exams are all 4 hours. And I know the stamina of the LSAT seems like very difficult, but you get used to it over time. And it's great preparation for law school, honestly, because and I had one exam in law school, was a 24-hour take-home exam, which sounds wonderful and lovely. Everyone's like, 24-hour take-home, that sounds amazing. I get so much time to work on it. it's on a curve. Everyone else has 24 hours to work on it. And if you don't think that there's going to be some gunners out there that are going to be spending almost all the 24 hours, you're wrong. There definitely are. And so law school is just like that. You have to be able to have the stamina to get through all of that. Obviously, not all the 24 hours. I took 8 hours at most, but it was still miserable. But the whole point is like being able to have the stamina to get through all those hours of an exam. That's great practice for law school.
So what were some of your favorite resources while studying for the LSAT?
My favorite resources, I really like the Facebook page for I like choice free questions. Those were always great. And then I also really liked a book that I discovered later when I was studying was Manhattan Prep's 5 Pounds of LSAT. I really like that as like a baseline for understanding formal logic and some of the vocabulary on the LSAT. Excuse me.
And then whenever you did, okay, so you said that you were studying through school, you took a course, and then whenever you like ramped it up when you got to law school or when you got to the summer, what did your schedule look like then?
Great question. So when I was studying during the summer, so I was babysitting and tutoring for ACT, SAT during that time. And so I did have somewhat of a kind of, because I was like a freelancer, if you will, like my schedule was a little off. Like I couldn't do definitive hours, definitive days, but I would try to study about 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. Then the other days I would just take off, or maybe one of those days I would take a practice exam.
Well, how often would you do practice sections versus drilling?
So drilling, the later when I was really ramping up my studying, I did more drilling than before. And I know that was where a lot of my score improvement came, because a lot of times it's so tempting to skip the basics and go on to just practice test after practice test, but that's not really helpful if you're not really gaining anything from that. So towards the end, it was mainly drilling. I would do it every other week. I would do a practice exam up until like really close to the exam, when I would do every week. I would do practice exam.
Do you mind sharing your diagnostic score?
Oh, I would love to share that information, because I think it's encouraging, because almost everyone who scores well on the LSAT has a terrible diagnostic score. Like that's just a thing. I was in the low 140s when I first started
awesome.
Or somewhere in the 140s. It was somewhere in the 140s, but like.
So you probably went up like almost 50 points.
Yeah, I went up a lot of points. So it's possible. It's possible.
It's possible. It just takes time, and you have to offer yourself the grace. I tell people this all the time. You have to offer yourself the space to learn and the grace to learn, because like it sounds really silly.
Deep. No, that's deep. That's deep. That's really deep.
You do, because if you don't, like, then you're suffocating, and you can't learn when you're suffocating.
Yeah, and like the thing is too is there was people in my like class that were getting 150s and 60s in their practice test, because they had already studied before they went to this. And
right,
so
and people just have more background information like for the LSAT. So I took some of my like psychology and stats class, for some weird reasons, really helped me with logic games, like just like some of the inferences and stuff. So that sounds really weird, but I did not really struggle with like the mindset of games, but it was hard for me to make progress in the other sections, where other people caught up to my game level very quickly, just because I just went in with a little bit of an advantage without even really realizing what gave me the advantage, other than being able to think in that way without really knowing, if that makes sense, like at all.
Yeah, and like it's so easy to look at a diagnostic score and then see the average. I would look at like what the averages were for certain schools and automatically like disqualify myself from applying to schools, like in my head, like 6 months out in advance, or 8 months, whatever, almost a year out in advance at all, or automatically disqualify myself from like applying to these schools in my head, because I'd be like, my diagnostic score that after like no studying was like so far beneath it, there's no way, right? Like,
yeah,
don't go in with that mentality, because keep an open mind, because you're like, your diagnostic score can be very, 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 very far off from your actual score.
It's great. Yeah, especially when you start, like, if you really learn the basics too, like main conclusions, how quickly you could actually make some progress on LR, from like getting, I only got 8 correct, to getting 12 correct. But then it's like the slow grind with the timing. And that's what a lot of people don't realize too, is accuracy is so important before time.
The LSAT's a marathon, not a sprint. And that's such a cheesy, like annoying thing to say. And I hate it when other people say that, but it's so true. Like it really is. It takes little baby steps, like you said, with like the main conclusion questions and all. But people get so annoyed learning like the basics and think like it's below them, or they don't want to learn it. But that's what all adds up.
And that's what we all did, right? And that's like why so many of us tutors like tell people this is like not because we want to waste your time, but because we want to save you so much time by going back to some of these basics.
Yeah, definitely. The basics are where the improvement set.
How did you stay motivated while you were studying?
That's a very hard thing to do, because it's really hard to just like self-regulate and study the hours you need to study in order to make an improvement. But I set baby steps for me. Like, for instance, like I'd be like, by the end of the month, I want to have this many points higher in LR, this many points higher in this. I'd set, and I'm a very goal-oriented person, so that helped. And saying I wanted to do this many games today, or like even day by day, doing it like that. And then also I just kept in mind the goal of it. I wanted to be an attorney. I want to go to a good law school. I wanted to get money from law school.
That was me. I told myself every day, every hour I studied was worth $250 if I got a full ride. Like, like I'll never make that money in my life again. So I might as well invest in myself and study. Why do you want to be an attorney?
That's a good question. I always get asked that. But I don't know. I've always been interested in reading, writing, and research, and it's kind of like an intersection of all of them. Mm-hmm. And
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, my biggest passion is like employment law, specifically like the disparities with women. Mm-hmm. And when this is such a cheesy story, but I always like telling it. When I was in math team in high school, I was such a nerd.
On the math team?
I was a mathlete, varsity.
Cool. Varsity math, yes.
I was a varsity mathlete, but their teacher told the class that whoever had the 4 highest scores in the math team would get to go to like the state competition, whatever. So I was the 4th highest score, like number 4. So I was so excited. To get to go to a state. And then she released a list. My name wasn't on it. Someone who scored lower than me was on the list, and it was a guy. So she made like an all boys team, you know? And she's like, oh, the guys get along better together, whatever. And I was just like, I was so confused. And it just like, I've always been very passionate about things like that and making it so women have equal opportunities and things like that.
And they're known that they can be successful too, because it's like, and once they are successful, you're allowed to talk about it. That's one of the things these videos.
They didn't place. They missed out. I'm not saying they slipped, but they did.
I want people to be able to like shout their achievements and like to be celebrated. We're moving away from the queen bee mentality.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And like which is awesome, because you can't have the queen bee mentality where you go to school, right? Because they're 60% female.
Yeah, definitely. Women are the majority there. I mean, it's bad if you're trying to date and you're a female there, but like if you're interested in men, but like I'm glad I already have a boyfriend, a significant other going to law school, because the straight females have a very tough time there. But other than that, it's great. And it's great to see that like there's female teachers that are very well, not teachers, professors that are very well respected at the school, that write textbooks, that are like featured on the news, you know, that are very, very well respected, that are female.
So are there ways that, because you mentioned to me separately from this video about just like the work-life balance, how do you balance that in law school? And do you feel like there is like a little bit of, do they handle that differently with females?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. For me, I heard from a 3L that was very successful in law school and that's another thing. Don't be afraid to ask the 3Ls what they did, because they did something right. They're still there, right? So I asked a very successful 3L that just got a job offer from an amazing law firm. I said, what did you do to manage your work-life balance? And he said he basically took law school as a full-time job, and he wanted to have dinner with his significant other every night, and he wanted to not have to study like late at night. And so all of his friends were thinking like he's terrible, he's not doing well in classes, probably because I always see him doing interesting things like after 8, you know, he's going to the bars, whatever, before Corona, after 8, and he's like, what is he doing? But in reality, he was just having a good work-life balance. He was studying he got up for classes started at 8, and he was finish his classes and study till 7, and so, or 6:30 or whatever, depending on the day. And then the weekends would be kind of a similar schedule. And so he studied a lot. That's a lot of studying if you calculate it out. That's way more than a full-time job of studying. But like he had it every night. He had to have dinner. After dinner, he didn't have to think of law school once, and that's an excellent thing to have to do. Right. When I'm eating, I cannot think about it. Yeah, while I'm eating with my boyfriend, I don't think of law school once while I'm having dinner with him. We're talking about other things. We're moving on with our lives, you know, which is a nice thing. I have my books in my car. Like they're out of sight, out of mind. Oh,
you guys are books in your car. That's neat. And like not to have that stress too, because then you just enjoy more of your time, because you're like, I got my work done for today.
It's nice to
I wonder if I wonder if there's a correlation between people that come straight from like straight throughs, the people that worked before, where like I like am used to working, so I'm used to putting in full days. Where in undergrad, I remember I had a terrible schedule because of like my school, where I wonder if like now going into law school, I'm more likely to try to do the 8 to 5 thing because like I'm more used to it rather, I mean, I would have to hold myself accountable to that rather than I know if I went straight through from undergrad, I would have been the like staying up all night studier for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely really hard when you get home because like law school classes for me, at least it was a front loaded schedule. So Monday through Wednesday, we had 8 a.m. to 2:45 classes.
Mm-hmm.
And those classes are hard. You're getting called on constantly and you're getting roasted. And it's just kind of, it's very draining. And it's very rewarding, but very draining at the same time. So after you're done, it's so tempting to just like want to take a nap or just want to like have a nice snack. Maybe I have some friends that like they go home, they want to crack open a bottle of wine. They want to not think about law school.
All right.
And like the thing is just like if you do that, you're rewarding yourself then, but then the rest of the night while you're enjoying the bachelor, drinking some wine, you're thinking about how you're going to have to study later that night, and so that's kind of the trade-off there. But for some people that works great for them. They go home, they go to the gym, they do things, they do their laundry maybe, and they get things done, and then they study afterwards, and that works great for them too. And so it really just depends what works best for you. I know personally after 7 I'm done. I don't want to do that anymore.
I remember I have one friend that's in law school and she says like I put an hour and a half in after my last cast no matter what. An hour and a half of studying, which doesn't sound like that much, but she's like, and then I get to take a break. She's like, I have enough energy to get through the hour and a half. And then I don't know when she puts in her other studying, but she like makes herself do that because like she's like, it's such a small goal but I accomplish a lot that I don't have to do later.
Yeah, and this is gonna sound really intimidating, but for each law school like doctrinal class, I recommend 3 hours of work between each class. And so in all technicality, between Monday and Tuesday, there's 9 hours of reading in all technicality. But here's the thing with that is that you on only Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, you have the classes. So from Wednesday to Monday, you have all that time to mitigate and do your reading. So I'll usually do my readings for Monday and Tuesday and the weekend. And so I just have my weekends on my Wednesday reading to spread out. And so that's kind of another way I make it work. And so if you're like diligent with your time, being diligent with your time really saves you. But I never pulled an all-nighter in law school, and I think that's like kind of a weird flex, but like it's possible. It's possible. You don't have to. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't study. I study an absurd amount. I study just a ridiculous amount, but at the same time, like you can do it without pulling all-nighters.
You don't push it off is what I hear. It's like you could go. I would be like, oh, Wednesday's my rest day, Thursday, or Thursday's my rest day. Which maybe you could do that. Thursday.
Yeah, you could do that. Tons of people do that.
They take it off. Sunday. Like I could like totally see that. But you're like, no, I conquer this in these hours, and I hold myself to that, and I get it done because essentially at the end of the day, like it has to be doable, right? Like,
yeah, it's very, very doable, and occasionally you might miss a reading. And here's the thing that like in undergrad, sometimes I would get in the habit that if I like missed a reading, I would continue missing readings after that. But you can't do that in law school. In law school, like if you miss a reading, they say like law school is like a moving train in a way. If you miss a reading, ask a buddy for the notes, they'll give it to you, and just kind of keep going and just keep studying. And that's just the thing with it. But I always recommend to students as well, like get used to the fact that like when you're studying for the LSAT, of keeping a schedule and sticking to it. And also like you can't let things slip in law school like you can in undergrad, because in undergrad, if you miss a quiz or you don't do so well in something, like it's totally fine. It's whatever. You can all make it up. There's tons of grades. In law school, most of my classes had 2 grades, like, and then final was like 80% of your grade. And so like if you slip on the final, it's over, Sounds so negative, but like you have to do your reading every single day. You can't let that slip because it's too much to make up. Like you see how big those textbooks are. Like if you miss some of those readings, it's over,
Well, that's what I think. Like at the final, if you're doing all the reading and stuff, can you like, if you're prepared, are you going to completely bomb the final if you truly did all the work?
No. Professors at Vanderbilt hate bombing people.
Yeah.
They don't fail students out really at Vanderbilt. I've never heard of a student failing out. Like
do your work.
The curve's around a B, I've heard. And so they don't like specify like what the actual curve is around, but I've heard like the average and things is a B, and most people get a B. And so you won't do like horrendous in anything if you really do the whole song and dance of it. If you really like if you do all the hours, you're not gonna do terrible. Like no one does like well, it might be terrible from what, like, in comparison to what you did undergrad or what you're used to doing, but like,
you're gonna get by.
You're not gonna get all Fs on everything, like, just because, like, you're not the best in your class or something. It's not like that.
Lastly, do you have any last bits of advice or thoughts?
Well, I'm so glad we got to talk about this, and it's so great to have another female LSAT tutor to talk to you about things. But the thing to keep in mind is just during studying, I know it seems overwhelming, especially during the pandemic, but you got this. And if you really want to be a lawyer, you can do it. I hate to get all motivational, but you can do it. Look at us, we've done it. Like, it's possible. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. You can do it. You got this. Stay strong.
Thank you so much, Nina.
No problem. And if you have any questions and anyone would like to email me with them, just my email is logiclsattutoring@gmail.com. So
I'll try to remember to put that in the link too below so you guys can have it for her.
Okay, perfect.